April 1945. The war was gasping its last breaths beneath a leaden German sky when the truck door slammed open. The metallic echo of boots on mud sent a shiver through the 27 captured women standing shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms torn, their bodies trembling. An American sergeant barked an order that froze their blood. "Strip everything off." The words sliced through the cold, and for a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a nurse from Bremen fumbled with her buttons, her lips trembling. Asterisk. This can't be real. Asterisk. They had heard the stories from the East Red Army vengeance, the West's fury, the camp's horrors. To them, nakedness meant only one thing: the end. A guard's rifle clinked against his belt as he stepped forward, repeating the command in slow, deliberate German. One woman collapsed. Another began to pray. There was no laughter, no chaos, just the slow, dragging weight of dust and silence. Behind the Americans, medics unpacked clipboards and cans of powder. The air reeked of disinfectant and diesel. The order wasn't punishment. It was protocol. But the women didn't know that yet. Every second stretched, their shame so sharp it blurred their fear. By May, over 500,000 German women would pass through Allied camps, their numbers swelling faster than supplies could keep up. The Americans, unlike many occupying forces, enforced the Geneva Convention. Few believed mercy still existed. Not after 6 years of total war. A young soldier from Illinois, barely 20, couldn't meet their eyes. He turned his face away as the women obeyed. That small, simple act, so human, shook them more than the command itself. Asterisk. Why would the enemy look away? Asterisk, one whispered. The sergeant's tone stayed clipped, efficient. Asterisk. Medical inspection. Typhus control. Move. Asterisk. They were ordered toward a tent, single file, their skin pale against the morning fog. The fear didn't vanish. It twisted into confusion. No jeers, no cameras, just silence and procedure. Somewhere beyond the barbed wire, a generator coughed to life, powering a field lamp that hummed over their shivering silhouettes. The war was ending, but none of them knew what kind of ending this would be. When the first medic raised a gloved hand toward the line, confusion turned into something stranger. Anticipation. Against all expectation, they wondered what would come next. The tent flaps slapped against the wind as they stepped inside. Their bare feet sank into cold mud. The air was thick with chemical powder, metal basins, and the sharp sting of alcohol. Instead of cruelty, they found silence. Instead of mockery, calm English orders. The Americans weren't here to humiliate. They were here to disinfect. A medic, sleeves rolled up, dipped his hands in sanitizer, the sound sharp, sterile. His voice was flat, professional. He didn't stare. He didn't smile. He just worked, checking skin, noting symptoms, dabbing powder into hairlines to kill lice. Each woman flinched at first, expecting worse, but nothing came except the hiss of antiseptic and the scratch of pens on clipboards. Reports from that spring estimated typhus had already killed over 30,000 prisoners across Europe. The Americans feared disease more than the enemy. The inspection wasn't about dominance, it was containment. Yet to the women, every movement of those latex gloves felt like judgment. A translator explained haltingly, asterisk. Procedure, typhus control, not punishment. Asterisk. A few believed her. An older woman spat on the ground. Asterisk. First they strip us, now they call it medicine. Asterisk. But when she saw the medic gently cover a wounded shoulder with gauze, her anger cracked. They were given ID tags, canteens of water, and gray army blankets. The sergeant kept his gaze fixed on paperwork, never on the bodies before him. To the prisoners, that restraint was disorienting. Asterisk. He didn't even look. Asterisk, one whispered, as if the absence of cruelty itself was too strange to trust. The younger medics avoided eye contact altogether. One, barely older than the prisoners, looked away when a woman's voice broke mid-sentence. Asterisk. Will we be shot? Asterisk. His silence wasn't cold. It was careful. That tiny gesture of decency began to shift something fragile. By the time they stepped out, the sky had lightened. The fear had lost its shape. They were clean, alive, but still shaking. No one spoke. They clutched their blankets, trying to understand why mercy felt so terrifying. An American corporal handed out steaming bowls of soup near the mess tent. The scent of rich, meaty broth drifted through the camp unreal. No one moved at first. After what they'd endured, food from the enemy felt like a trap. The corporal only nodded toward the bench and said quietly, Asterisk, eat, you need strength. Asterisk. The spoons clinked softly, the first sound of trust in days. For 6 years, they'd been told the Allies were monsters. Now those same monsters were ladling soup and handing out blankets. Asterisk. Why are they feeding us? Asterisk. One woman whispered to her neighbor. The other could only shrug. They didn't know Allied orders required every prisoner, male or female, to receive roughly 2,500 calories a day. They just knew the soup was hot and the soldiers weren't shouting. Across the yard, an American private knelt to help an older prisoner who had collapsed. His rifle slid into the mud as he lifted her. Asterisk. You're safe, asterisk, he muttered, though she didn't understand the words. But the tone pierced deeper than language. It wasn't pity, it was care. A German nurse named Lot watched him and felt something she hadn't since 1939, dignity. In the Reich, she'd been trained to follow, to serve, to obey. Here, under enemy control, someone finally saw her as human. She took her bowl, ate slowly, and realized how bitter hunger had made her soul, not just her stomach. That night, the women were given cots inside a wooden barrack, straw mattresses, rough sheets, a single oil lamp flickering above. They expected the door to lock. It didn't. A guard stood outside, smoking, humming a jazz tune from a nearby radio. For the first time since capture, silence felt safe. Lot stared at her hands, scrubbed raw, but clean, and whispered to herself, asterisk. They could have done anything. Asterisk. The thought wouldn't leave her. If mercy could exist here, in the ruins of everything she'd been taught, maybe the world wasn't finished after all. Outside, a medic turned off the radio and laughed softly with his partner. Jazz faded. In that fading, something new began. The slow, unsettling realization that compassion, too, could be a weapon. The next morning, a sound drifted through the camp that none of the women recognized. Jazz. A trumpet. Uneven, but warm, cutting through the fog like sunlight. The Americans worked while it played, stacking crates, checking lists, shouting in slang that sounded almost cheerful. To the prisoners, the rhythm felt unreal. Asterisk. How could their enemies laugh so soon after victory, so close to the ashes of war? Asterisk. Inside the barracks, Lot listened to the music and thought of home. What was left of it? Her city was rubble. Her country had surrendered. And yet the men who had crushed it were humming songs and handing out coffee. The contradiction made her chest tighten. The women had expected punishment or propaganda. Instead, they got routine. Each morning, roll call, health check, rations, disinfectant. Each afternoon, rest. sometimes reading lessons. Geneva observers came through with clipboards. 3 million prisoners were being processed across Allied zones. The Americans were determined to prove they were nothing like the Nazis. That fact itself was a message. A young private approached the women's barrack, carrying fresh bandages. He smiled nervously and said, "Asterisk. If you need, we help. Asterisk." His German was clumsy but kind. When he left, one of the women muttered, "Asterisk. Even our officers never spoke like that." Asterisk. Her tone wasn't admiration. It was disbelief. For years, obedience had meant fear. Here, it meant order without cruelty. As dusk fell, Jazz returned through a tiny field radio. The women sat quietly, wrapped in army blankets, watching guards trade jokes near a pot of coffee. The air smelled of tobacco and wet wood. In that ordinary peace, something inside them began to fracture. Lot realized she didn't know who the enemy was anymore. She'd seen hatred in her own nation's uniforms and restraint in those of her captors. The dissonance was unbearable. Asterisk. Maybe it's us who never understood the war. Asterisk, she whispered. Just as night settled into uneasy calm, a truck screeched at the gate. New arrivals stumbled out, ragged, starved, broken. They came from the east, captured by the Soviets. Their faces told stories their mouths couldn't. One woman's hair had fallen out in clumps. Another couldn't walk without help. Someone muttered asterisk. Smolensk. Asterisk. And the rest went silent. Reports later estimated 1 in 3 German female prisoners held by the Red Army never returned. Disease, starvation, vengeance, each word spread like wind through ruins. Here, under American command, the women were fed, clothed, disinfected. Over there, they were vanishing. The comparison felt obscene. A sergeant at the gate tried to calm the panic. Asterisk. Different side. Asterisk, he said. Asterisk. You're safe here. Asterisk. But the damage was done. The camp's fragile sense of mercy shattered under the weight of those stories. Gratitude twisted into guilt. Asterisk. Why them? Why not us? Asterisk. That night, Lot couldn't sleep. The moans from the infirmary bled through the walls. She thought of her sister, last seen near Königsberg when the Soviets advanced. Maybe she was still out there, maybe not. Lot whispered a prayer she hadn't said since childhood. By dawn, the women began treating the American camp like a sanctuary, not a prison. They followed orders without resistance, kept the barracks clean, even smiled when guards passed. It wasn't submission. It was survival. Compassion had become the rarest currency of the war, and they had just learned how expensive it truly was. When a medic brought extra soup to the newest arrivals, one whispered, asterisk, at least here we live. Asterisk. Lot turned away, tears burning behind her eyes. Because survival, she realized, wasn't victory. It was responsibility. Outside, the mail clerk pinned up a notice about correspondence. The words, asterisk, letters home, asterisk, made every head lift. Hope flickered, but only for a moment. The notice, typed in English and broken German, allowed prisoners to write one censored page. The women crowded the board, eyes wide, hands trembling. After months of silence, the chance to send a letter felt like salvation. Lot clutched a pencil stub the medic had given her, sat on her cot, and began, asterisk, Mama, I am alive, asterisk. The room went still. Only the scratching of graphite and the hum of generators filled the air. They wrote fast, afraid the permission might vanish before the ink dried. One described the camp food, hot soup, bread, kindness. Another simply wrote, asterisk, don't worry, I am safe. Asterisk, They folded the sheets with shaking hands and passed them to the guard. But what they didn't know, what no one told them, was that nearly 60% of prisoner mail in 1945 never left Allied censorship offices. Words were crossed out. Entire pages confiscated. The women's letters became ghosts, locked in bureaucratic silence. Weeks passed. No replies came. Lot waited by the gate each morning, pretending not to hope. When the post truck finally arrived, it brought only supplies and an officer's report. Asterisk. Censors hold everything. Asterisk. A soldier muttered. Asterisk. Rules were rules. Asterisk. In the evenings, the women began reading their unsent letters aloud to each other, as if saying the words might send them through the air. One wrote to a husband who'd never returned from the Eastern Front. Another described a home that no longer existed. Their voices filled the barracks like prayers no God was answering. Asterisk. Freedom isn't always bars. Asterisk. Lot whispered one night. Asterisk. Sometimes it's silence. Asterisk. The others nodded, too tired to speak. Even kindness had its limits. They were alive, yes, but unseen, unheard, suspended between worlds. Then one morning, the order came. Transfers, trucks, tags, new destinations. The limbo was ending, but not captivity. Engines rumbled before dawn. Orders barked through the fog. Asterisk. Roll call. Form up. Asterisk. The women, leaner but steadier, fell into line automatically. What had once been humiliation was now habit. The Americans ran the camp like a machine, predictable, precise, almost comforting in its rhythm. Days began with hygiene checks. Medics moved from barrack to barrack, inspecting hands, hair, wounds. Then rations, bread, stew, coffee. Lot and the others ate quickly, folding tin cups against their coats to keep them warm. After breakfast came labor duty, mending uniforms, scrubbing mess tins, sorting supplies. The repetition dulled thought. In monotony, they found peace. By mid-1945, Allied camps had turned efficiency into survival. Reports indicated prisoner labor across Europe reached nearly 75% of pre-war factory productivity. Even captivity had been industrialized. The women felt it in the rhythm of whistles, the way every gesture was timed to a bell. Yet beneath that order, something human grew. Guards shared cigarettes through the fence. A cook slipped chocolate to a younger girl when officers weren't watching. Someone had scrawled asterisk, peace soon, asterisk in chalk on the latrine wall. Small rebellions of kindness. In the evenings, the women gathered near the fence to listen to English lessons broadcast by camp loudspeakers. Asterisk. Repeat. Asterisk, the voice said. Asterisk. My name is A. Asterisk. Lot mouthed the words, her accent thick but earnest. Learning the language of the enemy felt like taking control of her own story. The barracks grew quieter each night, exhaustion mixing with uneasy gratitude. Asterisk. We work, we sleep, we survive. Asterisk, one woman murmured, and somehow that was enough. But safety had its own kind of fear. They knew peace was coming. Rumors of surrender, release, but also whispers of transfers to France. Some said reconstruction labor. Others claimed not freedom. Then one thunder-soaked night, headlights cut through the rain. A truck convoy idled at the gate. An officer's clipboard glistened under the downpour. Names were read aloud one by one. Lot's was among them. She looked back at the barracks, the first place since capture that had felt almost safe, and climbed aboard. The road out of camp disappeared into the storm. Rain hammered the canvas roof as the truck rolled across shattered roads. through gaps in the top. Flashes of ruined towns, flickered, collapsed roofs, burnt-out cars, hollow windows staring like eyes. Every mile pulled them farther from uneasy mercy and deeper into uncertainty. At a rail yard, French soldiers waited, faces unreadable. No one spoke German here. The silence between guards and prisoners felt heavier than chains. Lot's boots sank into puddles as she stepped toward the boxcars. White chalk letters on the side read simply, asterisk, travaux, work, asterisk. Inside, the air was damp and close. They sat, shoulder to shoulder, knees touching, the train's rhythm drowning out their thoughts. Asterisk. At least it's not Russia. Asterisk, someone whispered. Another replied, asterisk, not yet. Asterisk. The fear was different now, not of death, but of endless labor. Reports confirmed. France employed over 740,000 prisoners for reconstruction, clearing debris, rebuilding roads, filling graves. Officially, it was compensated labor. Unofficially, it was revenge disguised as utility. French civilians watched the trains pass with mixed emotions, grief, rage, pride. For many, these prisoners were living symbols of their occupied years. As the train slowed near a village, an old woman spat in the mud. A boy threw a stone that cracked against the side of the car. No guard stopped him. The message was clear. Whatever kindness existed under the stars and stripes had stayed behind. Lot stared through a slit in the wood, watching rain streak across the glassless windows of French houses. Asterisk. The Americans treated us like people. Asterisk, she whispered. Asterisk. Here, we're ghosts again. Asterisk, no one answered. The rhythmic clatter of wheels became the only reply. When the train hissed to a halt at the next camp, the air was colder, the fences taller. A French officer waved them out, his voice dry, bored. Asterisk. Welcome to your new home. Asterisk. Lot stepped down, realizing mercy was a language few nations spoke twice. Spring 1947. 2 years after surrender, the gates creaked open at dawn. A thin mist drifted over the French countryside as guards handed out papers stamped asterisk. Class release, asterisk. The word looked strange after so much captivity. Some women cried. Others stared numbly. Freedom didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like a question no one could answer. They walked out in small groups, clutching rations and documents, heading east toward whatever was left of home. The roads were littered with the bones of war-burned trucks, collapsed bridges, stray helmets half buried in mud. Each step carried the weight of years stolen. Lot reached the German border with blistered feet and one possession. The army blanket from the American camp. Frayed, its olive color faded to gray, but she folded it neatly over her shoulders like armor. Bremen was silence. Whole districts had vanished. Her parents' house was gone. Neighbors whispered, looked away. To them, returning prisoners weren't heroes. They were reminders of shame, symbols of defeat. The war had ended. But judgment hadn't. Across Germany, most female prisoners were released between 1,946 and 1,949. Records show many came back to nothing, no families, no jobs, no place in the story their nation wanted to tell. Some hid their captivity for decades. Others, like Lot, simply stopped talking. She found work in a hospital, bandaging wounds of men who had once served beside her captors. The irony wasn't lost on her. Every time she washed blood from her hands, she remembered those gloved medics, the first inspection, the moment her fear met decency. At night, she folded her blanket carefully before sleeping. It smelled faintly of smoke and disinfectant the scent of survival. She told herself she'd forget the camp someday, but the body remembers what the mind buries. One morning, sorting medical supplies, she found an American-made bandage roll. The logo stopped her breath, cold, a symbol, small but powerful, of how tightly the past still clung. She smiled faintly, whispering, asterisk. They saved us even when we didn't understand why. Asterisk. Decades later, the war lived only in whispers and photographs. It was the late 1980 seconds. Lot sat in her small apartment, overlooking rebuilt Bremen. Glass buildings stood where rubble once lay. Laughter, where silence had ruled. Yet tucked in her cupboard, wrapped in brown paper, was the one thing she never threw away. That olive-gray army blanket. Her 12-year-old granddaughter found it while searching for old photos. Asterisk. Ma. Asterisk, she asked. Asterisk. Why do you still keep this? It's so old. Asterisk. Lot looked at the fabric, fingertips brushing its rough edges. For a moment, she was 20 again, shivering under a foreign sky, waiting for death that never came. Asterisk. That blanket, asterisk, she said softly, asterisk, was given by a man who didn't hate me. Asterisk. The girl frowned, not understanding, so Lot told her carefully. Fully the order to strip, the inspections, the soup, the silence, the strange kindness that saved her dignity when everything else was gone. She spoke not of victory or defeat, only of mercy. The room grew still, the refrigerator's hum fading into quiet reverence. In the 1990 seconds, researchers at the Bundesarchiv began collecting testimonies like hers. Many women told nearly identical stories of fear turned to disbelief, of captives who followed rules when no one was watching. Asterisk. Sometimes, asterisk, one survivor said, asterisk. The enemy reminded us what being human meant. Asterisk. Lot never read those interviews. She didn't need to. The truth had lived inside her all along. She'd seen how decency could survive among ruins, how compassion could outlast ideology. That memory became her quiet rebellion against everything the war had taught her to fear. Outside, church bells rang, soft and distant. Her granddaughter wrapped herself in the blanket, laughing at its scratchy feel. Asterisk. It's heavy. Asterisk, she said. Lot smiled. Asterisk. It's history. Asterisk, she replied. The window light caught the dust in the air, turning it silver. In that stillness, Lot closed her eyes, not to forget, but to remember rightly. Because the war hadn't ended with treaties or trials. For her, it ended the day she realized that even in humanity's darkest hour, someone had chosen to be kind.